Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, we are going to be taking a look at one of the units that has been revealed by Games Workshop in the lead up to 10th edition, and we are going to be reviewing the ultimate declaration in Imperial firepower, the Deathstrike missile. That's right, it's time for everyone's favourite nuclear missile to trundle onto the battlefield and make its presence known. And if you're going to start a 10th edition unit review series, I feel there are few better places to start than this absolutely epic unit. So without further ado, let's take off, nuke the entire site from orbit, and dive right into today's episode. So for those of you who are new to 10th edition and maybe getting into 40k for the first time, let me briefly explain what the hell a Deathstrike missile is. To be honest, it is a brutally uncomplicated weapon. It's a giant fuck-off missile which has been strapped to the back of an armoured personnel carrier. In the lore, it's hinted that it is a nuclear weapon, but on the tabletop, you tend to find that they are equipped with these big plasma warheads, which, while still very devastating, don't instantly destroy every unit that's playing on the board at that time. But speaking of tabletop performance, the Deathstrike has had a little bit of a checkered history. Sometimes it has been usable, and it's been alright, even if that's just in a large apocalypse game setting. And other times it has been so ridiculously terrible that the idea of bringing one is basically like playing with just less points in your list. If you spend 150 points on a Deathstrike and turn up to a 2,000 point game, you are basically turning it with 1850. It had such little impact on the battle. In its previous iteration, in the 9th edition book, the Deathstrike was a complete meme, but a good one. Firstly, it had loads of different warhead variety, so you could take it with plasma warheads, vortex missiles, or even the coolest sounding weapon in the whole game, the God Spear warhead. And on the table, it was actually pretty good. A smart player could counter it, but even one small mistake could see a Deathstrike flattening a key enemy unit and really giving the guard a nice boost into the lead. But now that's all ancient history. We're going into 10th edition, and how is the Deathstrike shaping up? Well, let's start off by taking a look at its stat line. For starters, it has a movement value of 10. This seems pretty standard with tracked vehicles in 10th edition, and it's also in line with what it had in the 9th edition book. It's got a toughness of 10, which is a big improvement and a nice surprise. After seeing the Taurox with only a toughness of 8, I was kind of expecting Chimeras and all of our Chimera-like vehicles to have a toughness of 9. But what Games Workshop seems to have done is say any Chimera vehicle that's open-topped, like a Wyvern or a Basilisk, is going to have T9. But anything that's fully enclosed, even if it is a Deathstrike with a big explosive on the back of it, is going to get T10. So not only is this a nice boost for the Deathstrike itself, but it also bodes well for other vehicles like the classic Chimera, but also things like your Hellhounds as well. Combine that with a save of 3+ and 11 wounds, and you've got a pretty durable tank. I've been saying for a while now that I think 10th edition is going to be pushing people more towards mechanized and armored warfare, and this seems to confirm it. This is definitely something that your mech guard players should be happy about. A leadership of 7 seems to be the go-to for most guard units, and objective control of 3 is in line with what we'd expect from a medium vehicle. Overall, it's a very solid profile and one which I think the guard community is going to be pretty content with. But now let's move on to the main event. Let's have a look at that Deathstrike missile itself and some of the other weapons and abilities this thing comes with. I'm not gonna lie, boys, I am super excited to have a look at this Deathstrike missile. So let's just dive right into that. It has the Blast, One-Shot, and Plasma Warhead rules. Now, Blast means that for every 5 models in an enemy unit, this thing is going to get +1 attack. So even if you're shooting it at a single squad of 5 Space Marines, you're still getting +1. If you then start shooting at some bigger squads like Guardsmen, you're going to get +2. And when you get up to the really big hordes like Termagants, you could be getting as many as +6 attacks from this one weapon. The one-shot rule is pretty straightforward. You can only ever fire this weapon once per battle. Once you've let off your big dick rocket, that's it. Now, Plasma Warhead is not a universal special rule that you'll find in the core rulebook. Rather, it's a special rule that is unique to this vehicle, and we can see its explanation just under the weapon stats. So the Plasma Warhead, the bearer can only shoot with this weapon in your shooting phase, and only if it remains stationary this turn and did not use its Deathstrike missile ability to designate a target or adjust a target this phase. We'll take a look at those abilities in just a moment. When the bearer shoots with this weapon, do not select a target. Instead, resolve this weapon's attacks, rolling for each unit within 6 inches of the center of its Deathstrike target marker individually. Quick side note here, because I know one of you mad bastards is going to try and do this, but I don't think you can fire the Deathstrike missile in Overwatch. When I take a look at that stratagem, it says that you must do it in your opponent's movement or charge phase. And also it says you may target one unit that would be eligible to shoot in your shooting phase. It does not say you may shoot as if it were your shooting phase. So I apologize, but you can't nuke your opponent in their turn. Of course, this is just my interpretation, so if you disagree with it, or you've got some extra information that may help shed some light on the whole thing, get it down in that comment section below. But now let's look at the weapon stats itself. So the Deathstrike has a range of NA. Basically, it has an infinite range. I love this. The memes of being able to fire Deathstrikes onto other people's boards are now back, and I fully expect someone to do this in a narrative event. It has 2d6 attacks. Now remember that these 2d6 attacks are going to be rolled for each unit that is within 6 inches of the Deathstrike marker. So it's not a case of you roll 2d6 and spread them out amongst all the different enemies. No, if you are within range of 4 Space Marine squads, you would roll 2d6 against the first one, then the second, then the third, then the fourth. This has the potential to splash out a lot of attacks onto a lot of different units. It also hits with these attacks on a ballistic skill of 2+. Now I actually kind of like this, and I think it's a big improvement over the old Deathstrike. Sure, in 9th edition, when the rocket went off, if you hit an enemy unit, you just did a set amount of mortal wounds. And if you were running a God Spear, that could be as many as 16, which is huge, of course. But the God Spear had a very limited radius from the marker, and so typically you would only be able to affect one unit with it. And also, when determining if a unit was getting affected by the Deathstrike missile, a bit like how it is now, you measured how many units were within range of the target, but you had to roll 1d6. And on a 1, you just didn't hit that unit. Not even close. Nothing. Nada. And so there was always a chance that when you let off a God Spear and it was only going to hit one unit with quite a limited 3-inch radius, that it just didn't do anything. So what I feel like they've done with the Deathstrike missile in 10th is they have toned it down a little bit. It's not doing potentially 16 mortal wounds in one go or whatever it was. But it's also much more reliable. And it's going to do consistent damage every time that it gets fired. But speaking of damage, it has a strength of 16, an AP of 4, and a surprising damage of 1. Now, strength 16 is real good. It means any target in the game is going to get wounded on a 3 or better. In fact, anything up to something like a light vehicle such as a Taurox or a Venom is still going to get wounded on a 2+, which is brilliant. AP -4 means that unless you've got an invulnerable save, you are going to be feeling this. The only issue I have with the weapon stats is the damage 1. Damage 1 feels real wimpy for a big nuclear bomb. I would have liked to have seen at least damage 2. Look, if this thing hits you, it should at least be able to kill a Space Marine with each one of its attacks. I mean, if we just do a little bit of napkin math hammer here, if you were to fire a Deathstrike at a squad of intercessors, you would get an average of 8 attacks. Now, you're probably going to miss with one of those, so you're going to get 7 hits, and then you're probably only going to wound with 6 of them again. You're probably going to get a 1 at some point, right? That's going to be 6 wounds. Those intercessors aren't going to get a save against the AP -4, So that is going to be 6 wounds you do to that squad, which is 3 dead Marines. Now, on its own, that's not very impressive. But bear in mind, this does have a 6-inch radius, which is a 12-inch circumference, and you might end up clipping quite a few squads with that. It's really going to force your opponent to spread out, because if you're able to essentially take out half or a third of each of his 5 or 10 man squads every time you fire this thing, that's going to be pretty powerful. And especially if you're looking at enemy units that are more like guardsmen or guardsman equivalent, where they've got 1 wound each, you could be taking out half of every unit that you manage to clip with the Deathstrike missile. It's really going to come down to how much your opponent spreads out and what kind of units he's running. Because if this is the addition of mechanized and armored warfare, then we may find that the Deathstrike is actually kind of struggling a little bit. Because if we fire off our Deathstrike at an armored list, let's say some Chimeras or some Rhinos, it's going to start struggling a little bit. Suddenly now you're only getting 7 attacks, and that's on average. 2d6 is very swingy, and without the safety blanket of blast giving you an extra 1 or 2 attacks here and there, you could just roll that Snake Eyes and only get 2 attacks. But let's assume you get an average of 7. Now you're going to get your 6 hits again, but now because you're shooting at a transport, which is probably going to be toughness 9 or greater, you're only wounding on 3s. So suddenly 2 of those attacks are probably going to fail. That means you do 4 wounds against the enemy vehicle, and you are probably just going to do those 4 wounds straight through because of AP -4, but that's only 4 damage. If you're shooting against a Chimera, it's still got 7 wounds left. Shooting against a Rhino, it's still got 6, and if you don't destroy it, it's going to repair one of those in its turn. And all of this is assuming that the opposing player doesn't simply move his units once he knows where that marker is going to land. Especially against vehicles, it's going to be tricky to pin them down and let the nuke off, because they're just going to keep driving 10 to 12 inches away, and you're never going to manage to get many of them in that blast radius. Because of this, I feel like the best use of a Deathstrike is in objective denial and movement blocking. If your opponent's got a backfield objective that he just wants to sit a basic unit on the back of, he's going to have to really be careful about doing that in case Deathstrike completely just nukes them off the board. Also, if you want to try and stop your opponent from advancing down a certain part of the board, place down a Deathstrike targeting marker or 2, and your opponent's going to have to think twice about marching into the nuclear firestorm. But we've mentioned a lot about these markers now. We should probably go over the ability just to clarify exactly how it works. So each Deathstrike missile has a Deathstrike missile ability. In your shooting phase, each time this model is selected to shoot, if it has not shot with its Deathstrike missile this battle, you can do one of the following in addition to resolving this model's ranged attacks. Designate target. If this model does not have a Deathstrike target marker on the battlefield, place a Deathstrike target marker for this model anywhere on the battlefield. Or you can adjust the target. If this model has a Deathstrike target marker on the battlefield, move that marker to anywhere else on the battlefield. What all of this gobbledygook means when combined with the plasma warhead rule as well is basically if you want to fire your Deathstrike missile, you first have to spend a turn placing down the marker. You then have to wait until your next shooting phase. At that point, you can let the missile off and it's going to start affecting everything near the marker. But if your opponent has moved away and you don't necessarily want to let off the nuke, then instead of shooting, so you're going to have to wait another turn, you can adjust the target, adjust the marker, and put it somewhere else on the battlefield. Basically, you're always going to have to spend a turn placing the marker down, even if that includes replacing it, and then firing the following turn. And it's this sequence of events that is kind of a big Achilles heel for the Deathstrike and makes it a pretty tricky unit to use, because your opponent's always going to get a turn to react to where you place that marker. And you may end up chasing them all around the battlefield with this marker, never actually getting the chance to let off the missile. But on the flip side, a smart commander can play some serious mind games with their opponent and can force them to react to him, meaning that you'll be dictating the flow of the battlefield and you will have the momentum. But what's crazy about the Deathstrike is it allows you to seriously unlock your inner Krieg commander. Because you could get a few of your squads of Deathcore and you could surround enemy units with them and try and trap them in combat as best as you can. Perhaps they'll be able to get out, maybe they'll have to take a desperate escape attempt, but you could make it really difficult for your opponent to get out of combat or go where he wants to go, and it might force him to stay in combat with your sacrificial guardsman. If he does that, you then drop the Deathstrike on the whole damn thing. Yep, that's right, including your own men. Because in the guard, life is cheap, and in the guard, you're pretty much always going to outnumber your opponent. And if it costs you 12 guardsmen to wipe out that enemy Death Star unit with your Deathstrike, then that's probably a price in blood you're willing to pay. Little side note on top of this, Deathcore Krieg actually get better when they take casualties, and also they can regrow casualties thanks to their medipack. So it's actually not even a particularly high risk strategy for you as a guard player to try and pull that off. And on that rather dark note, we're going to wrap up today's video. Let me know what you think about the new Deathstrike down in the comment section below. Are you a new player? Has it made you excited to get into the guard as a faction? And if you're a veteran player, do you think it has improved since its 9th edition iteration, or it has got worse? If you have enjoyed today's video, then don't forget to smash the big red button, like the video, and also subscribe to never miss an episode. And if you found this whole thing particularly entertaining or informative, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. By becoming a supporter, you unlock a whole bunch of perks, but the biggest one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server. This is an online community with over 1,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MD Discord, and we've got channels for discussing tactics, army lists, painting, hobbying, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. In fact, we've got a painting competition happening right now. So if you want to slay the grey and make some friends along the way, then please consider becoming a channel member and jumping in that Discord server. And I just want to take a moment to say a big thank you to the latest channel members: Jordan Smith, Kraz, George Frost, Zar, Florian, DXP, Nick F, Daniel S, and Anarian. Thank you guys for doing your part. I also want to shout out the latest Patreons as well. So a massive thank you to Michael S, Legendary Hot Dog, Capusa, Strigoi Gold Queen, Mark Wilson, and Marion David Kinsel. Thank you guys for becoming Patreons. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal, heartfelt thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are my War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bon Bon Vert, Mark Panconi, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Diesel Fox, and August Varney. Thank you guys. Your ongoing and incredible support is a huge part of how I'm able to do Mordian Glory full time. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.